Then let's get going. So Peter Morin here from multiple organizations. Yes. So again, I asked everybody things that you may not know about them. So if you've gone to the now sort of on hiatus ISACA Atlantic Conference, Peter organized that for many years. Peter's also received some global awards from ISACA as well, and he tells me that he used to be the global president of the HTCIA, the High Tech Crime Investigation Association. Got it. They have a table upstairs. So if you're interested in what's going on there, and you're involved with things like forensics investigations, then you can learn a lot from that. There are a lot of people from law enforcement who are there, so go and see Morin, who is the current president of the Atlantic chapter, and a good friend of ours. Anyway, I told people I was going to shut up, so I'll give it over to Peter.
So just a precursor, and and Chris is always good at making me feel really nervous about things. Just a little while ago, I had nosebleeds, so if I run out the door, I'm not dying. It makes people uncomfortable when somebody starts to bleed out their nose for no reason. And he's like, "Oh, that's serious. You got like that.
Speaker notes, in case you need me to take over.
Oh no, I'm going to close the lid. You got to talk about it. I only have 108 slides, so it's funny. I worked for a defense contractor, and I went into a meeting one day with the U.S. Army on a project we were doing, and I had like 10 slides, and my plan was to talk for about an hour. And I remember that the officer in charge came up to me. He's like, "Do you have your slides?" I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, you only have 10 slides." It's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Dude, you need slides. You can't come here with 10 slides." And I'm looking at people in the audience, and I have seen, like, do they look like they want like 3 minutes? Everything I have 300 slides, and they're just clicking and reading over slides. This is pretty sad. So I'm going to talk today about Active Directory. I'm not going to bore you with this. So I work mostly in the operational technology space. So the AD stuff is quite interesting for me because where everybody is going to like Azure in the cloud, and they're going to AD and they're connecting into the cloud, or they're moving everything to the cloud. In the OT space, in many cases, we have on-prem AD, and we don't have a choice because a lot of the critical infrastructure is not going to the cloud yet. So I have to deal with the limitations of the security of AD and the threats that are there because I have no way of migrating those threats out. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those. So first off, just to give you an idea, who here does super mainstream ED management? Who's like an ED person, ED expert? Does anybody know what ED is? You're not here for basket weaving or anything, right? So the one thing to talk about, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the problems that we have within Active Directory. And these are issues that stem all the way back to the beginning of Windows time. So I started with Windows back in Windows NT 3.5.1, really a long time ago, back in the mid 1990s, back in the day when there was no Google. So when you had a problem and you would call Microsoft, and they'd be like, "Yeah, if you figure that out, call us back and tell us what you did." There's nowhere to look, right? So these problems have been around for a while. So from an authentication perspective, you're going to see a lot of LAN manager. If you've ever heard of the term NTLM, NT LAN manager, NT LAN manager. So that stems back to Windows NT and prior to Windows NT when there was just LAN manager. And then we've had iterations like NTLM version 2, and with Active Directory, since Windows 2000, we've introduced Kerberos. And everybody knows that Kerberos solved the problems and there's no security issues at all, right? Well, we know that's not true. So a couple things to understand. Even though we are using Kerberos, NTLM is still used. It's the backbone of AD and of Windows authentication. So when you want to join a domain, you want to authenticate between AD forests, you want to authenticate to the domain based on an earlier version of the Windows operating system, log-on authentication to non-domain controllers, systems configured as members of a work group, all this stuff all uses NTLM. So even if you want to go 100% Kerberos, you're still going to have to deal with NTLM in some way, shape, or form, right? So again, it's still used a lot, even though Kerberos is there. NTLM allows various computers and servers to conduct what they call mutual authentication. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So the differences between the two, NTLM is challenge response. So we're basically communicating back and forth with the machine we want to connect to, and we're basically doing a challenge response type of communication, whereas Kerberos is a ticket-based authentication that uses more of a trusted model. And I'm going to talk about them both in a little bit more detail. So NTLM is going to use password hashing. Everybody's familiar with hashing. Have you ever heard of the term pass the hash? Not that pass the hash, but the pass the hash. So essentially, there is a hashing algorithm that is still used with NTLM. And essentially, it's there to take a password and transform it into a string of characters that is not legible. Now, as we know with hashes, versus other ways of encrypting things, a hash is one way, right? So we can't go backwards with the hash, right? So the only way to validate the password is to basically say I have the word password and I hash it. I have to take the word password, hash it, and if the hashes match, I know that's password's password, right? And we do that today when we're doing all kinds of pen testing and we're trying to break passwords in that. Well, this works very similarly, right? So if you look here, and I know this is a little small, I have Nick's client here and I have a domain controller. Everybody can hear me okay? So basically what's going to happen with NTLM is Nick is going to send an authentication request, okay? Then the domain controller is going to send an NTLM challenge, okay, which is basically a random number. Nick's going to send, Nick answers with his hashed password, and then Nick's granted access in a response, right? Now, the reason that this seems really simple, but is a problem, is because I'm just sharing hashes, if somebody's able to get that hash, there's nothing validating that that hash came from Nick. So if I'm able to steal that hash, I can essentially take that hash and I can pass it around to other machines. And if that machine has a hashed password of Nick already, it gets validated. There's no trustworthiness in this, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more. So where are the hashes stored? This is important because it's going to lead into some of the vulnerabilities I'm going to talk about. There's two places we find this. On the domain controller, it's in a directory called in cwindows ntds, and the file is called the ntds.bit file. It's an encrypted file. And if you're on a local Windows machine, like a Windows 10 machine, Windows 11 machine, it's stored in what we call the SAM, or the Security Account Manager, and that is in Windows System 32 config. It's all encrypted, and the hashes are also stored as a copy in the registry, because we know that's even more safe, right? So when we're looking at hashes, we can either intercept, or we can try to steal them off the machine themselves. So why is NTLM bad? Well, it's bad because it relies on challenge response. It does not natively support multi-factor authentication. So if you want to use MFA, you've got to kind of bolt it on. Because of the fact that it uses challenge response, it's not part of it natively. It's a very simple form of password hashing, makes it vulnerable to things like pass the hash and brute forcing. And because it's old, it's not really advancing at all. Like they're not saying, well, we're going to use something more complicated. We're going to come out with a new version of NTLM. It's not really moving anywhere from where it is today. Now, Kerberos, on the other hand, again, it's better. It's not perfect, but it's better. So essentially, Kerberos is one that uses tickets as opposed to challenge response. It's been around since Windows 2000. Most people don't know that. They think it's just recently been in there. It does replace NTLM to a certain extent. However, if you want to replace NTLM, you have to actively configure your systems to replace it with Kerberos. And most people don't do that. At least on the OT side, we don't. So instead of passing the user's credentials over the network in a hash, we use a session key that's created, and that's used basically to authenticate the person. And it's for a fixed time, right? So if we look at that, as you remember how NTLM worked, in this case, Nick's going to request a TGT or a ticket granting ticket from the authentication server that's attached to the Active Directory. The authentication server is going to send back an encrypted session key and ticket granting ticket. Nick requests access to a SQL server from the TGS, the ticket granting server. The TGS sends an encrypted session key back, and then Nick sends that over to the SQL server to get access. So in no time are you actually sending hashed passwords around. We're using tickets to do this. So the authentication is still happening at the Active Directory level using NTLM, but we're actually not passing around password hashes anymore, right? So there's no interception of password hashes. There's no pass the hash anymore. Now, Windows uses Kerberos version 5. The initial user authentication is integrated into WinLogin single sign-on architecture. So there is still authentication that's happening once, and then there's this passing back and forth of tickets, right? There's infrastructure called the Kerberos Key Distribution Center that's integrated with other Windows security services running on the domain controller. And the KDC uses the domain's AD directory service database to house all of the account information. So it's a little bit more distributed, although I'm going to show you Kerberos still has its problems, right? Does anybody know here if they're still, like, are you guys, anybody here having problems still combating NTLM type things, like pass the hash and things like that? Anybody have witnessed that in an incident or anything? I'm just trying to trick people, but you gave it up now. So with Kerberos, the user never directly authenticates themselves to the services they need. So if I want to connect to a file server, I'm never going to pass my password in a hashed format. The Key Distribution Center, which runs on every DC, issues a ticket granting ticket, which includes a unique session key. It's time-stamped either 8 to 10 hours, and that's what's passed around to give access to these various systems that are on the domain. Any questions so far? Make sense? Okay, so then we get into the problems of all this, and that's what I'm sure you all are here for. So the first one, and this one is kind of weird, so the enumeration, which shocks me a little bit of how easy Active Directory gives up information. So who here has used Nmap before? Who here doesn't know what Nmap is? Who here wants to admit they don't know what Nmap is? So Nmap is a tool used to probe other machines, right? I know this is a little small, but with Nmap we can basically run a really quick Nmap scan. And if you use the -A option that basically pulls back a bunch of information about the system, it's automatically going to tell you it's a domain controller. You're going to see things like, you're going to see all the DC services. You're going to see like the domain, the DNS computer name, the NetBIOS computer name. You're going to see all this DC stuff. So identifying a domain controller on a network is really easy with Nmap, right? You don't have to worry about that. Secondly, being able to pull up a lot of information about the domain itself, the forest name, if it's a subdomain, there's all kinds of information that'll get pulled back when you actually probe that system. There's also a lot of Kerberos information that will come back as well. So a good example here, and this was something, a test we had done. I've changed the names in the domain, but essentially we do some OSINT. We're doing a pen test at a company, let's say. And we go on the internet, we find out who all the executives are, right? So I got their names here. I've got, CFO, CIO, and some people of interest. Director of IT, senior systems admin. Most probably you'll have a domain admin password, a domain admin account. CEO, CIO, and so on. And then what we do is we guess a bunch of potential user accounts. So Becky Clark could be B Clark, could be Becky, could be Clark B, Becky.Clark, so on and so forth. Well, the cool thing you can do with this is you can actually, what I've done here is I'm running Nmap. I'm specifying port 88, which is Kerberos, right? I'm running a script called KRB5, which is the Kerberos 5 database. Kerberos 5 enum users, and what I'm doing is I'm passing it the domain which I know, and then I'm passing it a text file called usernames.txt. And in that file, I've got all my potential username combinations, right? And And then when you run that, it'll actually return back when it's considered a user or as not a user. So it actually probes Kerberos and it says, is Becky a user? No. Is B. Clark a user? Yes. And it notes that. So you can see here, right off the bat, I'm getting half of what I need. So if I want to do anything like a pass to hash, because even with Kerberos, we're still running NTLM on the network. I've got half the solution here, I have the usernames. You can either do this with Nmap, and in this case, I'm using Metasploit as well. So being able to probe the Kerberos database and get that information, very easy, right? And I can bet you right now that it's very, very rare that people are going to be able to pick this up in their SIM or in their monitoring. It's going to go by so fast, they're not going to really see that it happened. Now, there are other tools you can use as well. I've just put them up here. If you always want to try these. PowerView at AD Recon, these are PowerShell scripting packages. They are used very, very, very often by attackers in massive campaigns. So what I like to tell people is if you've been hit with a ransomware attack, when the ransomware gets clacked off at the end, there's most probably weeks of lead-off time before that actually happened. There's a lot of reconnaissance where they steal your data and they get access and establish a beachhead on your network. A lot of this is happening. So you'll see stuff like PowerView, AD Recon, tools like Rubius. Rubius is a brute forcing Kerberos tool. So it's really good to be on the lookout, and I'm going to show you how to detect some of this later on. There's Bloodhound and Sharphound. They'll actually build these nice full diagrams of what your AD forest looks like. So these are a lot of tools that are used by attackers to do a lot of the reconnaissance work prior to them really trying to steal any of your data. Questions so far? I've had a lot of coffee today too. That's and it doesn't put me to sleep, but it does energize me. So okay, so with that we get into like the initial access part. So what can we do from an initial access perspective? Well, we've got SMB relay. Anybody heard that term before? SMB relay? You probably have, yeah. No one's ever heard of it. So this is an interesting one, and 9 times out of 10, when I look at a network, they allow SMB relay, which is really, really bad. And pen testers, usually like within the first 30 minutes, they're going to look for this. And if they find it, they'll be like, I'm done. I go home now. I've figured it all out. So essentially, we know that when we're going to communicate file sharing protocols, so if I want to connect to Tarek's machine, for example, and I want to download some files from his machine, unless I've gone the route of really, really locking things down, I'm going to use NTLM. And what does NTLM use?
Hash passwords.
It uses hash, right? So when the client wants to access a specific service, the service is going to send a challenge to the client. The client is asked to encrypt it with the client's password hash. Once the encryption is done, the client sends back the encrypted challenge to the service, and then you've got the communication. So we want to intercept that, right? So I'm going to skip over this, but basically what causes this to happen is what we call as a lack of SMB signing. And this is the common thing that pen testers will look for. It's not a default setting. So if you haven't specifically gone and turned on SMB signing in your network, it's not turned on today and you're susceptible to this. So what happens is when you have SMB signing turned on, the server requires that all SMB packets sent by clients are signed by digital signature. That is what gets by. So if I'm legitimately Peter talking to legitimately Tarek, if you stole my hash, you're not legitimately me anymore. And this is there to validate that it is not me doing it, and it's supposed to stop things. This is not turned on by default. And it's crazy. I think, like I said, 9 times out of 10 that I've gone to clients, they are not running SMB signing. So basically, this would prevent that attack from happening, right? So to validate that is another Nmap scan. You Nmap scan the machine, you're going to see this thing that says message signing enabled, which is very throws you off a little bit. Message signing enabled but not required. So if you see message signing enabled not required, means that SMB signing is turned off. Okay, and then you're off to the races at that point. So at that point, you You can do all kinds of cool things. So the first thing you do is what we call an SMB relay attack via DNS fallback abuse. Big thing to say. So when you're in an Active Directory, how do we look things up in Active Directory? What is usually a service that we have to run on our domain controller? DNS, right? Well, what if I'm going to connect to Tarek's machine, and Tarek's machine is called Tarek, but by mistake I forget the T, right? What's going to happen when I hit the DNS? DNS is going to say that doesn't exist, right? But there are fallback mechanisms to that, okay? There's a few of them, okay? There's what we call LLMNR. There's NBTNS, which is old NetBIOS stuff. There's MDNS, and so on and so forth, okay? So what we can do is we can intercept that fallback traffic, and we can poison it. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, how often does this happen? Like, how often does somebody not type like a share in properly? If you're in a network with thousands of people, it happens regularly. And typically, this is where that beachhead is happening. We're setting up the machine, we're listening for this garbage, and when it comes out, then we log it. So I'm using a tool here called Responder, and I know that I think Julian mentioned Responder a few times in his talk this morning. It's a very good tool. But essentially, what it allows me to do is it allows me to listen for LLMNR and things like NBTNS traffic and poison that. Okay. So essentially, if you're looking for server 01 and I've misspelled it, we're going to when it goes to the DNS and it fails on the DNS, I'm gonna get it on the LLMNR, which is the fallback protocol from DNS, right? So to give you an example here. Beth here is looking up, does an NS lookup for server 01 doesn't exist. Now when she tries to go to it, it's still going to pop up this. This pop-up is coming from my poisoning server, right? Now once this happens, what do we normally pass to connect to the machine? Anyone? Chris has got prizes for you. What are we passing to connect to a machine? We're passing a hash, right? So get this. You try to get to a machine, you type the wrong thing in, DNS says it doesn't exist, it falls back to LLMNR, I'm poisoning it, so you now connect to me, and what do? I capture your hash. And it's easy. Luke, dude, I've set this up, put it on a network on a Raspberry Pi, plug it into a network, go away, come back 2 days later, I've got like pages and pages and pages of hashes, okay? And not only that, these are not complicated hashes. These are old NTLM hashes. So from there, you can see here, look, poison answer, poison answer, poison answer, poison answer. And then I've got my client's Acme Beth, and I've got Beth, and I've got her NTLM hash. Okay. Here's another way you can do this. You can run a tool called Impacting. Okay. Impacting will allow you to do the same thing. This is really cool. So I go to connect to Tarek's machine. But by mistake, I type in something wrong. Then it does a lookup on the DNS. It falls back to me. Not only do I get the hash, but I go ahead and I pass the hash back to Tarek. And now I have access to his machine, and I can actually do an interactive console to his machine. Does that make sense? So not only am I going to get his hash, and I'm going to pass it on somewhere, Impact is going to do that automatically. It's going to grab his hash, and it's going to send it back to him. And because he's got a hash on his machine, because it's his, it's going to now give me an interactive command. So look, I now have a full command prompt to his machine. This is all because of limitations in NTLM, okay? This is my favorite one, and I've done this a few times. It's so much fun, okay? Everybody know what a rubber ducky is? Pack 5? So if you don't know what a rubber ducky is, it's a USB stick, but inside it's actually got a microprocessor, and it's got storage and all kinds of things, and you can run scripts on it, okay? So this is what we do that's a lot of fun, okay? So what I do is, I actually script, and you probably can't see here, but I actually script in the rubber ducky, and what that rubber ducky does is the minute you plug it into your machine, it pops up a window. I don't have a picture of it. It pops up a window, and it basically grabs your hash from there. And you can see at the top here, basically it sends it back to my impacted server. And it happens, like I have like all kinds of delays and in there, so it happens so fast you don't see it. Like when you go and you type run and you type // Terra and then it fails. Well, it does that by the script. And it does it so quickly you don't see the pop-up come up. And then what it does is it does what I just showed you a minute ago, but it does it physically. So if I don't have access to do this to poison your LMNR traffic, if I can't poison it because I'm not on your network, because there's segmentation or whatever it is, I just walk up to the machine, I plug this guy in, it pops up and it basically does that. It does // server with an incorrect name. It goes to my impacted server and it does the same thing. So I can actually start it from a different way through that Ducky script. Really cool. Yeah, and you don't even see it. Like I've gone up to like CFO's desk, plug it in, and I unplug it, walk away. It takes like a microsecond to work.
This needs physical security. Otherwise, what's up?
Physical security there. There you go. And then you can see here, there's where it's coming back to my impacted server. You'll see my hash here right here. And then once you have those hashes, you can either do the impacted thing where you automatically redirect to Terra's machine or what have you, or you can take them and you can run them through something like Hashcat or crackmat exec or John. As long as you specify, like for example in Hashcat, you specify 5600, which is the module for NTLM hashes. You create them, and then depending on what kind of machine you have. Like I know our pen testers have like these huge servers with big GPUs in them, and they can crack the stuff really, really quickly. And you've got passwords.
Dual hash is one way.
What's that?
Dual hash is one.
Yeah, you're matching them back, right, to a dictionary, right?
Brute force attack.
Yep. Yeah.
Because it does take a long time.
Depending on how big the GPU you have in your machine. So if you got big GPUs in there, it could, and depending on how complicated the password is, it could be really, really short. It could be really, really long. You're going to get like if you've got 100 hashes, you're not going to the chances you're going to crack all 100 in like the first day are slim. But you may crack if you crack 3 or 4. That's all you need. What's that?
That's a success.
Yeah.
Okay, 3%.
That's all you need, right? Or you don't want to crack them at all. You can use them and pass them around. So you've got options, right?
Or save them. So you don't even have to crack.
Yeah, exactly. You just pass them around, right?
If you do a hash table, you don't have to get back to the original. You just have to get back to any value that gives you the same hash.
Correct. Yeah. So that's kind of the NTLM side. Now, if you get into the Kerberos side of things, we get into things like dealing with the tickets that are being sent back and forth. So this one is what we call AS rep roasting. So this is what they refer to as a pre-authentication attack. So pre-authentication is something that is turned on by default. Now again, you're going to notice some of these things, you're going to be like, oh, come on, that's very improbable that happens. Like there's certain things that have to be turned off or turned on for some of these attacks to work. And I wouldn't be showing you these if I haven't been in the wild and seen those things having been turned on or turned off. So that's why I bring them up. And these are legit attacks that are out there. So pre-authentication essentially is when it's turned on, which is by default, the user initiates a process by transmitting an authentication server request to the domain controller. And the message includes a timestamp encrypted using the hash of the user's password as an encryption key. This is to validate that the requests are legitimate at the end of the day. So basically, there is a setting in here, and you can see here's my user Doug Chambers. There's a setting in there that says do not require Kerberos pre-authentication. Now again, like if that's not typically checked off, like why would somebody go and check it off and make their machines vulnerable? I have seen this turned on, and in a lot of cases on the OT side, we have a lot of legacy applications that don't support Kerberos pre-authentication. Or that you go to a vendor and the vendor's like, do you have pre-authentication turned on? You're like, yeah. Well, we think that's your problem, so go turn it. And then what will happen is the engineers, not that I want to crap on the engineers, they'll just go and they'll turn it on. They don't call anybody. They don't even know what it is. They're like, some guy told me to check this off, so I'm just going to do it and it's going to work. So you end up going, you find the stuff, you're like, oh, thank you. You end up finding the stuff, you wonder why. So I got to speed. We got 15 minutes, so I'm going to speed through a little bit of this. So again, what you can do with this is you can do things like run in packet, do what they call a get NP users against the domain and the domain controller, and basically you can actually pull their ticket granting ticket. And we know those ticket granting tickets have been created using the hash. So once you've got that, you can actually process it through something like John the Ripper, and you can actually yank the hash out of it, out of the actual ticket granting ticket. Now, mind you, that's only going to work if you have pre-authentication turned off, which is probably like less than 5% of the time. But it is something to look at, and it is something you have in your, your box of tricks, right? Anybody ever heard of Kerberoasting? So Kerberoasting is another one, and that's used to obtain passwords for AD accounts that have been set the service principal name or an SPN value, and that's specifically for service accounts. So with that, for example, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Basically, what you're going to have is within your, and I've got like a SQL service account for SQL Server here. There's a specified SPN there. So the first step is to enumerate all the accounts that have SPN set. This works with a username or a hash, and if they have an SPN tied to them, then we can request the ticket granting ticket for that SPN. So in a lot of cases, what I've seen in this is you create a service account and it's not working. So what do? They add it to the domain administrator's account because that just makes everything work. And now you basically are able to enumerate an account, pull back their information, and they're part of the domain admin account. So you can see here, I was able to pull it back. I was able to get the ticket granting ticket and crack the password. So again, Kerberoasting, another way you're able to pull that hash out. Lateral movement. So we got our good old pass the hash. So again, you do not need a password to do this. All you need is the hash itself. So really easy to do. Now, the one thing with pass the hash, and does anybody know that the common tool that we use to do pass the hash starts with an M, ends with a Z? Mimikatz. What does everybody know about Mimikatz today? Anything will pick it up, right? So right off the bat, like, Defender, CrowdStrike, when CrowdStrike's working, you could be running a free tool. They're all going to pick up Mimikatz. It's so common. That doesn't mean you can't run Mimikatz. There are ways of running Mimikatz, even though it'll be picked up. One of the most interesting ways of doing it is using tools like MS Build and actually building it into an XML. And then basically running it through MS Build when you're going to run it, as opposed to running it on its own. It basically gets obfuscated to the point where we've tried it with Defender, for example, won't pick it up. So there are ways to obfuscate Mimikatz out of its raw form, which allow you to do things like pass the hash. I'm running it here, and I've got Defender running on that machine, so that test machine. And you can see here, basically what you want to do is, with Mimikatz, you do what we call a privilege debug, which allow you to access anything going to LSAS, which is the memory space where password hashes are being kept, and then basically dumping the login passwords from the machine. And then once you have it, good old in packet there. I've got in packet WI exec, nice hashes. I take the hash, I take the domain, the user, the machine I want to get to, and it passes that hash over. And you can see I'm now connected to Philo 1. Logged in as Beth. They need to authenticate, just need to pass your hash over to the machine. The other machine doesn't know it. For all it knows, it's Beth legitimately passing that hash over to get access to that machine.
Mimikatz would be detected as soon as we try.
That's what I'm saying. There are ways to obfuscate it. And if you come see me afterwards, I'll show you. Using tools like MS Build, you can actually build it into another executable. And those tools won't be able to pick it up. There's a number of ways we can do the to actually obfuscate it. Now, from a persistence perspective, we've got things like a DC sync attack. And what that is when your machines are doing replication, they're sending stuff between each other. Thank you so much. They're sending things between each other. So again, very much like the pre-authentication, you have to have things turned on for a DC sync attack to work. And it's typically those two settings, the replicate directory changes all, they have to be set. Now typically where I see this is in system admin account, where a systems administrator makes a change to the schema and wants to replicate it, wants to force it, you need those settings to do it. So when you've got a large organization and they make changes, they don't want to wait the time it takes to replicate it, they want to force it. So that's typically where I've seen that setting been turned on, and it's typically set on domain admins and administrators so that they can force replication, right? So it does happen, right? And then basically what you do is, again, you run Minicats, you probably can't see that, but you're basically able to do intercept those hashes as they're synced between domain controllers. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to do things like a golden ticket attack. So golden ticket attack is another attack against Kerberos. What you need to do this is you need a couple things. You need the domain, which we can get. You need the SID. If you have a user account on that domain, it's easy to get. What you need to get is the hash from the KRBTGT. That's the account that actually is created when you create your domain. It's what basically runs your Kerberos ticketing service. Okay, you need that hash, and that's that hash that you pull from that DC sync attack. You do a DC sync for the Kerberos account, you get the hash. Once you have all those pieces, okay, what you're able to do is you're actually able to use that ticket that you can create. So in this case, I have a user called Beth again. You can see Beth. I did a who am I under groups. She's not a domain admin. See, she's not in there. I tried to access the domain controller using the C $sign share. She had no access to that, so she was a regular user, right? Well, what I do is, with Mimikatz, I do a Kerberos golden ticket. I put the domain in, I put the SID, okay? I put the hash, I put ID of 500 for administrator, I put a fictitious user, I just created a user, okay? And what the Kerberos service is going to do is it's going to dump a ticket. It's going to dump a ticket called ticket.kirby, okay? Now that ticket, you save it to a file, okay? And once that ticket is saved to a file, you attach it to your user, and then you basically have all the access that is associated with that ticket. And that's like large access, right? Now the great thing about it is typical ticket lifetime when you create it through something like Minicats is 10 years. So that golden ticket I've created myself that I've assigned to my user, which gives me privilege, basically gives me privileges for 10 years, no matter what. So again, these are ways of persisting access. These aren't ways of gaining initial access. These are persistence mechanisms. So my attacker has access to the network. I want to keep that network access. Even if they remove him from groups, I can do that through a golden ticket account, Admin SD holder attack is another interesting one. The admin SD holder, that is a container in Active Directory that's used to populate new groups that are created. So it's a template that has all the permissions for protected users and groups. So groups like your domain admins, your enterprise admins, your REPL admins, all of those. When I create new groups, that's basically what they're assigned. So if your access is removed from one of those groups, basically when I re-add, it propagates all of those settings back. So for example, I've got my account here, Doug Chambers there, and basically what happens is every 60 minutes, even if somebody deletes the account, it's going to rewrite all those rights back over to my Doug Chambers account because it's set up in the template to force that to happen every 60 minutes. Again, it's a persistence mechanism, right? I had to get Doug the access to be able to do the bad things, but I want to keep him there from a persistence perspective. I mentioned earlier the NTDS.dip file. That is the file that contains. Thank you. That's the file that contains all the passwords, all the password information in the Active Directory. So this is another way of actually extracting that. Who's familiar with BSS admin here? Shadow copies, right? So basically what you can do with this, this is really interesting. You can actually do a shadow copy of, you can do a shadow copy of the C drive and basically extracts. The problem is the ntds.dip file is in use. You can't touch it. You can't copy it out. You can't modify it. It's used by Active Directory as long as the machine's running. So by doing a shadow copy, I take a copy of that file, and then I can actually extract the ntds.dip file out of the shadow copy, which you can see at the bottom there. I'm copying it out of the shadow copy, and I'm copying it to a directory in C10. I also need a couple other bits of information. I do things like the system registry hive, and so on and so forth. And from there, I do a repair to the file because it was in use, and I can actually start cracking out into the ntds.dip file. You can see the extraction there. I think we're almost out of time. I'll go through this a little bit. There's things you can do to obviously enable SMB signing on all your devices. That if you do SMB signing, you never have to worry about pass the hash anymore. That's a done deal. Disable SMB v1 and v2 if you can, but at least go to v2. There's a lot of vulnerabilities. I mean, if you guys remember WannaCry, it was all perpetrated through SMB v1. Disable LLMNR and NBT NS. They're garbage protocols. They serve nothing. Turn them off so you have no fallback errors, right? There are a number of things you can do, and I'm not going to go through this because I'm almost out of time, but I've got all of the. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to figure out what to do.
So your pre-authentication attack, there's a couple things to look for. Unusual TGT requests. And again, there are use cases, and if anybody's interested, I can give you those that you can build into your SIM to basically look for those things if you're running something like Sysmon. Even Event Monitor will give you some of this information. Ticket encryption downgrade. So if you're looking at the events, you're going to see this thing called ticket encryption type. It's a hex. It's 0 times 17, 0 times 21. So basically what you're looking for is they should always say 0 times 12. That means using strong encryption. If somebody's lowering the encryption of those tickets, then you know there's something not right happening. So looking for a lower level of encryption, abnormal number of unique accounts authenticating from a single endpoint. So why are there 50 accounts trying to authenticate from one laptop? These are all things that are out of the ordinary, right? Enable Kerberos pre-authentication. So make sure that pre-authentication thing is not checked off. There are ways to find that out. There are ways to audit the machine to look for that in the Active Directory. Enforce strong passwords for accounts. Enforce use of strong encryption. So again, supporting encryption types attributes to 0 times 18. Those are all ways to avoid the possibility of a pre-authentication attack. Kerberosing. There is a setting you can set called Kerberos Armoring in Windows 2012 and further. It is a GPO setting. It actually shows up as Kerberos client support for claims, compound authentication, and Kerberos Armoring. Turn that on, it will help you. It protects the channel between the client and the key distribution server. Eliminating use of insecure protocols. So again, that's your encryption level. And adopting strong password hygiene. Those are all things that will help you to protect against Kerberosing. DC Safe, there are ways to monitor traffic. If you are doing deep packet inspection, looking for traffic which comes from DRS, UAPI, RPC requests. Those are usually, and specifically looking for this operation, TS get NC changes. These are normally indications that something's happening from a DC Safe perspective. Looking for event 4662, which is audit directory service access. When you see this event, looking for when a user exercises the replicating directory changes. So you're looking for users that should not be forcing directory replication. That could possibly be a DCC attack. I mean, obviously, don't turn replication on. Don't give them the right if they really should have it, and obviously use it. Yeah. Chris is giving me minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Good, good.
Sorry,
We're friends.
overriding.
I know him. Golden ticket, analyze Kerberos tickets for self-size manipulation, usernames that don't exist in Active Directory. When I showed you the golden ticket attack, the last thing I put in there was like a fictitious username that I just need to have something in there. Look for like usernames like they'll be stupid, they'll be like, I've been pwned or I've hacked you, like stuff like that that should make sense, right? Modified group memberships, usernames and RID mismatches, weaker than normal encryption, and ticket lifetimes. They should not be more than 10 hours. 8 to 10 hours is typically the ticket duration. If you see 10 years, 10 years is Minicats. That's the default in Minicats. So if you see a ticket that lasts 10 years, it's a Minicats ticket, right? And there are events at the bottom there. Minimize elevated privileges and change the password for the KRBT GT account on a regular schedule. Any questions? There's a lot, and like I said, you guys will get the slides. There's a lot of neat in these slides that you can use, like specific event IDs to look for and things like that. And obviously, if anybody wants to ask any questions after this, I'm a consultant, but I'm not a sales vet. So I'm probably do myself very bad injustice by answering a lot of questions and not like signing people up for business. I just don't do that.
Salespeople hate you, but
I hate you, really. Hate you. So feel free. That's why I don't put any of my work stuff here. Reach out to me. If you want to hire me, great. If you don't want to hire me, I'll still answer your questions. So. You can let out a sigh of relief now. We're good. It's done.
thank you.
I did. They're just
All right.
dumbfounded. They don't know what to do. I put them in trance here, you know. Now we want. I know. You better have snacks or something. We need it right now.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's my question.